Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. And just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, we just finished the National. We're preparing for like a little national post-mortem thing, and the content gods shine upon us and give us another thing. So as you can see from the title and everything, we're having a little fun now with some Fanatics versus Panini, manufacturing wars. As Panini files a federal lawsuit against Fanatics over anti-competitive conduct. So credit to Sports Collectors Daily for having a series of tweets that encompassed a lot of the components of it, and also the article here that I'm going to link to you as well. So I'll link to you the Twitter, well, the X thread, I guess now it's called. So here, this one. And then I'll also link you to the article, so you can check those out on your own time if you want to read through some of the more of the particulars. But the lawsuit specifically focuses in on some different activities that Fanatics has undertaken. And we've noticed over the last several, obviously, months that Fanatics has done a variety of different things to slowly put the squeeze on Panini. Talked about it in videos, talked about it in the live stream as well at length. And it's one of those things that you were expecting as time went on that it was going to get increasingly hostile until something came of it. Either there was going to be a sale or there was going to be something like this, something like a lawsuit. And in this case, Panini filed a 56-page federal antitrust lawsuit against Fanatics, alleging that they interfered with its existing contracts for trading card production and other moves that violated Panini's ability to conduct business. Now, this is going to get really interesting because the verbiage is important. Anti-competitive conduct. You could probably make a bit of an argument for it, and I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer, so certainly I'll leave it to the legal professionals to battle this out, and certainly we'll have a lot of fun with that. But the idea of monopolization, that's where it gets a little bit interesting because in some ways Panini, obviously having the exclusive licensee, has a monopoly over certain components of it. But there's more than just having the licenses to producing the cards, and that's what this lawsuit talks about. It talks about some of the different components. So as I said, I'll read you a couple of excerpts here, but I'll leave you the article so you can read through the whole thing from front to back as you'd like to. In one of the quotes here is, Fanatics has done all this anti-competitive conduct to monopolize the markets for major U.S. professional sports leagues trading cards, and others even before its exclusives begin, they allege in the lawsuit. In short, Fanatics seeks to cripple Panini both for the short term, the remaining years of Panini's current exclusive license agreements, and the long term. So that's where it gets a little bit interesting because they broke it up into different elements of it and through a lot of different aspects of it. Now, I'm going to skip a little bit ahead forward and then I'll come back, but I want to read a couple of different pieces because they compiled several of the tweets. As I said, I've got them here so you can check them out kind of in sequence, but I'm going to go, since they summarized it here, I'm going to borrow it a little bit further down in the article. One of the ones that I had heard a little bit of noise about some time ago and at least alluded to in the live stream a little bit, but I didn't have specifics, so I couldn't be more specific than that. I just heard some rumblings about it, but it's included in here. Fanatics acquired through 2 transactions a controlling stake in JC Packaging, LLC, the critical high-tech custom manufacturer of trading cards for Panini. Court documents state, the acquisition, a direct violation of GCP's contractual obligations to Panini, was taken to undermine Panini's ability to perform even the short run under Panini's existing licenses, thereby hoping to force Panini into a sale. That's kind of what we talked about, because as soon as you get into the manufacturing side of things, again, the manufacturers of today don't manufacture their own cards. That's something I alluded to when I was talking about my last kind of audio version podcast that I did just the other day. It was talking about Upper Deck's challenges in getting product out the door. Well, one of the key pieces is, can you get your product in the pipeline with the various suppliers? So this JC Packaging LLC is obviously an example of this, but can you get in the queue with one of these suppliers? Because the manufacturers are using basically the same suppliers. Upper Deck has talked about this in the past where they've had to go to external suppliers. They've got a supplier in Canada. They've got a supplier in Italy. If any of you followed any things related to the most recent edition of the Cup, well, there are some of the cards that have a serial numbering where the font is in a little bit of a different style. Those ones tend to be ones that are coming from the Italian supplier. So they're producing the cards, but they're having to produce them all the way on the other side of the world, all the way in Europe, and then having to send them over just to be able to get time on a line to be able to produce it. That is a manufacturing challenge, and that is a logistical issue that prevents products from coming out on time, amongst other things, of course. But that's just one element of it. But in this lawsuit, if Fanatics has control of JC Packaging here, which they're talking about, which is exactly what they're talking about here, it creates an issue where now you've got your competitor who also happens to control the manufacturer that you're relying on for part of your printing capabilities. Now, the key is there's one difference between basically controlling it to the sense that you don't allow your competitor to have even any access to it versus giving them less favorable access, basically pushing them to the back of the line, which in turn slows down their ability to release products. Now, on the other side of it, Panini has been able to release products. Obviously, Upper Deck is on the extreme end of it, and they are obviously struggling a lot more with it. But at the same time, Panini also could be ahead of them in line. So it's one of those things where you create a bit of an interesting question about how much influence it is. But just talking about it from the perspective of having a controlling stake, obviously, if you've got a little bit of control over that, you can definitely give yourself more favorable treatment as far as getting a spot in a queue to get stuff printed and out the door. Now, anything beyond that is just speculation on our part, but it would stand to reason. I think that's part of the reason you would include it in here, because obviously the possibility is certainly there of giving yourself favorable treatment and in turn holding down your competitors. So that would be an anti-competitive practice, kind of leading into what we're talking about. So that's one thing that I had suspected was the case and heard a little bit of noise about, but it's interesting to get a little bit more specifics about it. Now, skipping ahead further down, you've got another aspect where they could again control a portion of the manufacturing process. And part of the quote included in here is, Fanatics CEO Michael Rubin approached Panini in May 2023 to threaten that Fanatics would no longer supply Panini with any jerseys for Panini to offer to consumers as elements of its trading cards, the suit states. Rubin added that Fanatics would not stop its pressure campaign against Panini and would continue to sign exclusive deals with players that Panini could otherwise use to offer fully licensed trading cards to consumers. So we've already seen an element of that with Fanatics having exclusive deals with a series of rookies that obviously would make it very difficult, aka impossible, for Panini to be able to include autographed cards of them in their future products. And given that it's your rookie year is one of the places where you want to have a lot of those autographed cards, obviously that would hinder you as a business in terms of providing your cards. Now, kind of counter to that, on the other side of this equation, we do also have to factor in something in mind. And again, I'm not going to play lawyer because a good lawyer could argue almost any aspect of it. But I will say that one piece that probably Fanatics could use as a retort is, number one, Panini is still able to produce cards. Number two, they do still have the licenses for however much longer they've got the licenses. And number three, you can point to somebody like Leaf producing unlicensed cards as an indicator that you can still produce cards even if you don't have the licensing. Now, obviously, some of these other elements are a little bit more underhanded, a lot more of applying direct pressure to their manufacturing capabilities. But obviously, in a lot of this, Leaf proves that it is possible, not easy certainly, but it is possible to continue to manufacture cards without licensing and without direct access to a lot of these things. The other component of it is also that Panini themselves produces unlicensed baseball cards. So they're licensed by the Players Association, but they're not licensed by the league. So they've got the cards there without the logos and without the direct team nicknames. So it's one of those things where obviously even Panini's own products and some of the sports they don't have licenses for prove that in fact they can produce cards. So it's going to be kind of interesting how the two teams of lawyers decide to go back and forth pointing these things out and then talking through it. And the question is, does the judge have any understanding whatsoever of the intricacies of how this industry works and the weirdness about the licenses and what can be done and what can't be done? So it's going to be something very interesting to see how it plays out. But it is fascinating that in order to try to make this happen, and I don't blame Panini for doing this, because at this point they had been squeezed from so many angles, including, but not limited to, the ones that we talked about for the manufacturing, but also as pertaining to basically a talent drain in terms of hiring out some of Panini's key people. And we talked about that some months ago. So it's one of those things where Fanatics has been applying pressure from almost every direction. And at this point, this feels like Panini basically pushing back in whatever way it can to try to get some kind of relief from this continuous beatdown that they've been getting from Fanatics from all angles. Now, with that said, I'll include one more quick quote here, and it was kind of Fanatics' response to this, and I honestly found it I kind of enjoyed it. You guys know I enjoy the snippiness, so this is the quote here from this piece. Panini's lawsuit is a baseless, last-gasp, flailing effort by a company that has lost touch with its consumers, is failing in the marketplace, and has tried unsuccessfully for years to sell itself, a company spokesman replied to Sports Collectors Daily. Panini is trying to blame Fanatics for its own inability to keep pace with what players, fans, and even its own employees rightly want. It is hardly surprising that Panini received an F grade from the Better Business Bureau. This is where you get one of those GIFs, the oh snap, or you get the guy, with the shocked hands. That's where you get that. That's where you get that meme coming out here. Going for the jugular. I kind of like it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's from the pertaining of people that like to watch the industry. It's not surprising. As I said, I don't blame Panini for trying to push back in whatever way it can. It seemed inevitable that one of two things was going to happen. Either the sale was going to happen, or it was going to reach a situation where they were going to have to try something like this. I don't know how strong their legal case really is, but obviously there is some anti-competitive stuff in here that I think you could reasonably argue meets that criteria. But the thing is, about as far as monopolizing, well, again, you've still got other players in the space. And even some of them operate without licenses. So it's one of those things where, yeah, they're making your life extremely difficult. The manufacturing piece I thought was very interesting in terms of the controlling interest. But at the same time, Panini's still getting out product. So I guess it's going to be kind of one of those back and forth things where you can argue it's like, oh, but they're preventing us. It's like, but you're not being prevented. Here's the list of all the products that you released. It's like, oh, but they were really delayed. It's like, yeah, but Upper Deck has delayed products. Everybody can have delayed products. It's one of those things where you can kind of argue it depending on the angle and direction in which you want to try to make the argument. Either way, it was very interesting to see a lot of these things laid out in the lawsuit itself, which obviously opens the door a little bit more on kind of what's been going on a little bit behind the scenes. Time will tell here as for how far they're able to go with this, and if it drags out for a while, because that can in and of itself be almost another tactic, because Fanatics certainly has the resources to be able to go through a long, protracted legal fight. Is this something where Panini can ever really win? And I was actually, when having this discussion kind of on the side, I was reminded of another antitrust lawsuit similar to this, where the winning party did win, but it was very much it was kind of a defeat in victory. And I'm not sure if any of you remember the history of the old USFL, but I was able to pull an article on this from old ESPN's website here, and I'll include a link to it for you at the end. You can tell based on the formatting here. This is a really old one, but it pertained the USFL lawsuit with the NFL. And the key piece here is highlighted at the end. On July 29th, a jury of 6 found the NFL guilty of acting as a monopoly, but agreed with the NFL's argument that the USFL had done itself more damage. I'll repeat that one more time. Agreed with the NFL's argument that the USFL had done itself more damage. In a certain way, that's kind of what the Fanatics statement was. They're saying Panini had hurt itself over time and put itself in a position where it was struggling with these various things. It had done itself more damage. Again, I don't know if that's the direction they're going to go with it, but it is kind of interesting that there is a little bit of a parallel there. The jury awarded the USFL a symbolic $1 award, which was trebled according to antitrust law to $3. The total, including interest, came to $3.76. The USFL eventually did collect more than $6 million in court costs, but by then it was too late. So the USFL did win their antitrust suit against the NFL. But in reality, they still lost. The USFL was gone. Well, now it's back, but the original USFL is gone. My point here is to say that, again, I don't blame Panini for doing this lawsuit, because it makes a lot of sense from their perspective to try whatever they can to push back in whatever way they can. I don't know if it's them trying to buy more time, if they legitimately think they can win this kind of lawsuit, or even if they think in winning they're able to position themselves any better. Because if the licenses still expire and they still don't have them, at the end of the day, they're on borrowed time either way. So it's one of those things where it'll be interesting to kind of sit back and watch as an observer, but I don't know what really legal standing they have, but I, again, don't blame them for throwing everything but the kitchen sink back at Fanatics to try to at least stem the tide a little bit somewhat, and potentially put a little bit more of a microscope on Fanatics to make them tread a little bit more lightly, as they've been proceeding along very aggressively in this path. This collision course was inevitable, but we are here now. So anyway, that's it from me. I wanted to get out some thoughts. Like I said, I will include a link to the Sports Collectors Daily article, so thank you to them for providing this excellent summary here. A link to the X feed or thread or whatever you want to call it. And then I'll include a quick link to the ESPN article if you want to get a chuckle, a little trip down memory lane for those of you who enjoy a little football history. So that'll be a little thing in there about an antitrust lawsuit where the people making the lawsuit did win, but in reality didn't win anything. And sometimes that's just the way the legal process goes. So it's one of those things where just because we got this nice dramatic lawsuit here doesn't mean we're going to get a quick resolution on this one. It might drag out for a while. With that said, more videos coming up on the channel. Live streams Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern time. I'm sure we'll talk about this one a little bit. I'll take some more time to chew on this, read through some more of the reactions, and we'll put some pieces together. The plan for the Friday mainly is going to be also a bit of a national postmortem, kind of get a little bit of a lay of the land. And I also will try to see if I can invite a couple of folks that were at the National to get their thoughts now that the thing is completed and now it's in a rearview mirror, and we move on to the rest of the hobby calendar in 2023. Curious if you have any thoughts. Again, it is just came out, so right now it's all really high-level stuff, but it is kind of interesting to go through the summary. Do you think anything comes of it right away? Or is this just the first step in a long series of steps as the legal process kind of has to play itself out? So that'll be it for now. Like if you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.